Last lesson, we looked at what actually changed when someone is reconciled with God, a explanation of where someone now stands with God, but that did not explain how they might feel on any given day. This lesson is about what begins the shift internally when identity is actually anchored there. Romans 5:1. Since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Peace with God means there isn't a verdict still waiting to drop. Because of Christ, your standing with God is already settled. That changes something internally over time. When things go wrong, whether it be mistakes, pressure, or ordinary life setbacks, it no longer feels like everything is collapsing. You can acknowledge it and keep moving forward. Often in our culture, success, money, or personal milestones can start to feel like a final measure of whether life is going well. But when your standing with God is already secure, those things stop carrying that kind of weight. They can still matter, but they're no longer the ultimate reference point. Even death cannot undo the gift of salvation Christ has secured. Of course, life still carries responsibility and difficulty, but it is no longer lived under the shadow of a final threat. Hebrews 4:15. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Christ understands suffering firsthand. During his life, he experienced hunger, exhaustion, rejection, and temptation. He was misunderstood, opposed, and ultimately beaten and executed on a cross. He also knows our inner thoughts. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You can see this in the way he treated people. John the Baptist, the one who publicly announced Jesus as the Messiah, was a man of great faith and even his relative. Later, he is imprisoned and facing real suffering. Notice what happens once he is in that situation. From prison, he sends messengers asking Jesus, "Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another?" And in many ways, the same questions still appear today. When life becomes difficult, people still begin to wonder whether God is really present or whether their faith is misplaced. Yet, instead of criticizing John, Jesus says, "Truly, I say to you, among those born of women, there has arisen no one greater than John the Baptist." Christ understood the moment John was in. He recognized the pressure and suffering behind the question. Often today, it's common to build an identity around approval. That could come from success, reputation, or the opinion of others. In today's world, that pressure can come from work, social circles, family expectations, or online attention. When approval becomes the center, life can start to feel unstable because those things are always shifting. Paul speaks directly to this tension when he writes here in Galatians 1:10, "For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ." Paul experienced this shift himself. Earlier in his life, he was known for persecuting Christians, believing that he was defending the Jewish faith and serving God by stopping the early church. That reputation brought him approval and authority among the religious leaders of his time. But after encountering Christ, everything changed. Once he began following Jesus and preaching the gospel, that approval disappeared. His decision to follow Christ cost him reputation, safety, and acceptance. When identity is settled with God, the weight of other people's approval begins to loosen in all areas of life. Their opinions may still matter, but they no longer determine who you are. Now, and this doesn't mean dismissing wise counsel. There are still mentors and voices worth listening to. It simply means the approval is no longer the center that defines one's identity. Proverbs 28:1. The wicked flee when no one pursues, but the righteous are bold as a lion. That kind of boldness isn't usually loud or dramatic. Often it simply looks like steadiness. When someone is secure in where they stand with God, they stop reacting as though their identity is constantly under threat. Over time, that security changes the way a person carries themselves. There is less need to exaggerate strength or hide weakness. Disagreements, criticism, or a lack of approval no longer create the same pressure to defend every decision or prove something. Over time, this creates a steadiness that is not dependent on circumstances. So far, we've been talking about what changes internally: peace with God, stability, and freedom from approval. But identity isn't meant to stay abstract. When something truly shifts at the level of belonging, it eventually begins to show up in how someone moves through life. Not dramatically or overnight, but eventually. That's what we'll start looking at next.